Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. I'm the type of guy that likes to ask questions that no one really seems to bother to go through the trouble of answering. I want to find out how long it takes to get a good set of artifacts. I want to find out both the time length and resin cost it takes to build up a good character. There are a plethora of issues with answering this type of question though. Artifacts are very RNG based, so it's pretty difficult to actually put a number on how long it would take to get a good artifact. Perhaps you could get a statistician to figure it out, but even then, it would be difficult because there are many confounding variables in what determines if an artifact is good. Getting an actual realistic and applicable answer is going to be difficult, but I think I have figured out a way to find an answer, and that's through experimentation. In order for my experiment to be a success, I must first define my methodology. I'll be very roughly following the scientific method. Honestly, I don't even know if you can call this a good use of the scientific method. It's more of a concrete plan. So first, we identify the question. The question is, how long does it take to get a good set of artifacts for a character? From my personal experience and observations of grinding tons and tons of artifacts, probably thousands at this point, I get the general feeling that it's around a month of grinding an artifact domain, or approximately 5,000 resin to get a good set of artifacts, and around 8,000 resin to really min-max a character. Next, we'll form a hypothesis. If we spend 5,000 resin on an artifact domain, then we'll get a good set of artifacts for a character. So now that we have a provable hypothesis, we have to define and determine the experiment itself. First, what type of characters are we building? Support and DPS characters both have different numbers of investment. For the purpose of this experiment, we'll use DPS characters. This can be either an on-field DPS like Zhao, or an off-field DPS like Xiangling. We also have to define what a good artifact is. Now this is somewhat subjective and ranking, but we'll assume that this test is for players above AR 55. I'll assign a rank for each crit value threshold that an artifact can get. The higher the crit value, the more valuable the artifact. For those who don't know, crit value is how much crit an artifact has. You can get this value number by adding up the crit damage on an artifact with the crit rate value of the artifact, but multiplying the crit rate by 2. So for example, we have this royal plume here. It's a feather. It has 19.4% crit damage and 10.5% crit rate. So we take the crit rate, which is 10.5, multiply that by 2, and we get 21. Next, we add the crit damage, which is 19.4. Add that up to the 21 value of the crit rate, and we get 40.4, meaning the crit value for this feather is 40.4. The rankings for crit value thresholds will be as follows. D tier will be 19% crit value and below, C tier 20 to 29%, B tier will be 30 to 34%, A tier will be 35 to 39%, and finally S tier, the best possible artifact, 40% crit value and above. So taking a look at the artifacts we just looked at, the feather would fall under the S tier because it was above 40%. Now there are a few caveats. This applies to all pieces assuming these specific main stats. The timepiece is scaling with defense, attack, or HP. The goblet has an elemental damage bonus. And the crit circlet is crit rate or crit damage. The exception to these rankings is the circlet because you are stuck with a 1 in 4 chance rather than a 50% chance when upgrading them. Because of this, the circlet will follow the same rankings but at half the values. So for example, this crit damage circlet with 10% crit rate would be considered S tier because it has 20% crit value on it. Half of 40% is 20%, so that's why it would be considered S tier. We'll use these rankings to see how many artifacts we get of a particular rank. We will also be looking at how many artifacts we get that can actually qualify to be upgraded in the first place. In order for them to qualify for upgrading, they must have both crit rate and crit damage on the artifact. This can be at either level 0 or level 4, with the exception of minimum rolled crit values. Like for example, this 2.7% crit rate is not good enough to be leveled up. For this experiment, I am also going to exclude Elemental Mastery and Energy Recharge, as they are too volatile and character dependent to really say if they are good stats. This experiment will only be measuring crit rate and crit damage stats, nothing else. Next, we must define what is a good set of artifacts. A good set of artifacts gives us the desired crit ratio, which is roughly a 1 to 2 ratio of crit rate to crit damage. This would ideally be around 60% crit rate to 120% crit damage. However, I find that this crit ratio is best for characters that do not ascend with crit. I believe that a 70% crit rate and 200% crit damage are most desirable and good enough. Anything beyond that is more min-maxy. Because a lot of RNG is involved, we'll have a margin of error of 5% for crit rate and 10% for crit damage. If you don't know what a margin of error is, well, basically all it's saying is that if a character has 72% crit rate and 195 crit damage, they'll still be counted as having good sets of artifacts. It essentially means we'll allow some wiggle room for above and below the ratio. This test will also have to exclude external factors that contribute to a good ratio. For example, Kaching's ult gives 15% crit rate. Same thing for Blizzard Strayer users who value crit damage more. This is not something that is an optimal calculation for them, meaning that these calculations won't be optimal to some DPS characters, but for the most part it should be fine. We run into yet another very tricky problem. In order to reach these crit values, we have to also assume that the weapons have crit on them. The problem being that crit rate and damage is not something that is consistent across all the weapon base types and rarity. Because of this, we'll make a standard value of crit rate and crit damage and apply it to our characters depending on the circlet they have equipped. In order to get this standard weapon crit value, we'll use the Battle Pass weapons as a standard and assume our characters are equipped with a Battle Pass weapon. This is because I believe that low spenders, whales, and dolphins all have Battle Pass weapons since they are very good value. Don't worry, free-to-play players won't be left in the dust. I'll make a separate calculation for free-to-play players and assume they have a Blackcliff. We will have to categorize each weapon type. All of the Battle Pass weapons have a crit rate of 27.6 except for the Deathmatch, which has a 36.8. As for the Blackcliffs, 2 of the weapons will have a crit damage of 36.8 and the other 3 have a crit damage of 55.1. While I was editing the video, I realized that I made somewhat of a mistake. It's not wise to assume that off-field DPS characters like Xiangling or Xingqiu are gonna want to use a crit rate or crit damage weapon. Most of the time these characters want to use energy recharge weapons, and I found that 6120 is for those characters, while characters that don't really need as much ER like Fischl are characters that want a 70-140 crit rate to crit damage ratio. So that is a correction I'm going to be having to make in my Google spreadsheet. But basically all it means is that there's just going to be a new category, one for off-field DPS characters with an ER weapon, one for off-field characters without an ER weapon, that would just be with like a Blackcliff or a Battle Pass weapon, and then the on-field DPS characters like Zhao or Ayato will remain the same, that 70 to 100%. So that is a correction that I wanted to make. Are you keeping up? I hope this isn't too complicated, as I've tried to explain this as simply as I can. If you are having trouble, then that's my fault, but feel free to rewatch parts of this video to get a better understanding. Anyways, continuing on, we'll have to look at each set that we farm for independently of each other. So for example, if we farm the Peak of Vindigar, or whatever its name is, and get good artifacts from both artifact sets, they will be counted as if the other artifact set was a waste of resin. Meaning, for example, if we farm 4,000 resin in the Peak domain and build up one very good Hydro character and one very good Cryo character, the resin cost will be 4,000 for each character. The exclusion for this will be goblets, as they are very difficult to obtain on set and are usually the off-piece. How will I test my hypothesis though? Well, that's easy. I farm artifact domains. Each video will be covering a different artifact domain and resin cost. I will be recording my findings in a Google spreadsheet, of course, which will be shared at the end of this series with you guys, my viewers. There is yet but another issue though. Artifacts are heavily based on RNG, meaning we must have a large sample size to avoid biases or skewed data. We must have a very large sample size, otherwise this experiment will not be considered valid. I figured that 50,000 resin worth of artifacts, which equates to approximately 2,500 artifacts, might be good enough as a goal for now. But I may bump this up to 100,000 resin worth of artifacts, which is 5,000 artifacts, to solidify this experiment. I am curious to hear what you guys think would be an appropriate sample size number. Now, I've seen a lot of YouTubers do this thing where they say, oh, I spent this much resin on this character. Click the video to find out if it was worth it. Those are mainly for entertainment purposes. But I ain't about that. I'm about to end their whole career and give you guys a legitimate answer while also trying to be entertaining. Granted, it may take me quite a while as I am only one person doing a massive experiment with a time-gated resource. I'm not spending any money either, so I won't be doing any Primo Gem resin refreshes or buying the battle pass for more fragile resin. I could ask other people for help, but there is no real way to verify if their own findings and reports would be accurate. I'm totally not using that as an excuse because I'm too embarrassed to ask people for help. It's not like I'm an antisocial nerd or anything. Baka. Oh my god, I can't believe I just... Why would this information be beneficial though? Other than for content and curiosity, I think it would be good to know how much you can expect to grind for your current and future characters. Once we determine our answer at the end of this experiment, we can give people a resin number and time frame for if they want to push the characters to the next level. I am trying to be as transparent as possible. I am no brainiac, I am not smart, I barely passed AP statistics, okay? I might make mistakes, there might be more flaws within my experiment. If you guys feel like this experiment is severely flawed in some way, please let me know. Even when I was writing the script for this video, it seemed like more and more problems kept popping up. Is this experiment perfect? No, absolutely not. Is it applicable to all DPS characters? No, absolutely not. Will it give us a good, rough estimate? Yeah, probably. I am kind of just brute forcing through this experiment to find an answer. I know that this video might have seemed a bit more overwhelming or complicated, but it's really important that I explain all this stuff so that my experiment has some actual validity to it. This was a longer video and all this talk about methodology and math can be rather boring. I promise that the future videos won't be so information heavy and will be mainly more about entertainment and the eternal suffering of artifact grinding. This video was an introduction and explanation of my experiment and will be yet another series that I am making, which I think is going to be just as interesting as my free-to-play Zero to Hero series. In fact, they are going to be somewhat intertwined with each other. I will be reporting my findings and progress with you guys for each individual domain trial. Most of these will be in sets of 5,000 resin around each month. At the end of this series, I'll analyze my overall findings, come to a conclusion, and give you guys an answer. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to be up to date with this series or any of my other videos. That'll be a wrap for this video. Remember to take care and have an utmost wonderful day. But it's really important that I explain all this stuff so that my experiment... Okay. I know that this experiment... Okay. I'm not spending any or buying the battle pass for my more... I almost had it. Oh my god.